Chapter 16. Discovery. We walked in silence down several flights of stairs before reaching the bottom. 4 dimly lit hallways stretched in 4 different directions. Above each door, a sign in Lude's native language told the reader which cardinal direction the hallway followed: north, east, south, or west. I had been here before. I worked here and had friends and allies here, but it didn't feel anything like a homecoming. I felt sick to my stomach. Now was my time to shine as the guide. I pointed to each of the corridors and rattled off their contents.
That hallway leads to communications. That one goes to the quarters, mess hall, and medical bay. That one goes to storage, and that one takes you to the mechanical rooms.
I drew a circle in the air with my fingertips.
But they all connect to each other eventually, so we don't have to circle back to get somewhere else,
I clarified.
If we were looking for something capable of making the mutants we ran into, where would we go?
Asked Diane.
Where do they keep the science stuff?
I thought for a moment. I hadn't ever seen any test tubes or science experiments during my time here. However, there were many heavily secured doors that could be protecting any manner of sinister secrets.
I would go that way.
I pointed to the route that would lead us to storage.
There are doors I was never allowed behind down that way.
I didn't want to go down that hallway, but I knew it was our best chance at finding the laboratory where they were doing their horrid experiments. Down that way was where I first met Seth. Down that way was where he killed my squad. Down that way was where he murdered my friends. Down that way, I knew I had to go. I took the lead and headed down the hallway before the others. Diane, John, and Seth followed closely behind me. Our footsteps echoed eerily off the walls as we walked, making it sound like we were accompanied by a platoon of phantoms. The series of doors embedded in the bare, concrete walls were our only indication that we were making any forward progress. When I was stationed here, the doors hid armaments, maintenance supplies, living supplies, and the other odds and ends that allow soldiers to perform their daily duties. None of them ever gave the impression that something nefarious lurked behind them. Finally, we arrived at the warehouse where larger instruments of war, vehicles and such, were stored. The room had been picked clean since I was stationed here. There were no vehicles or stacks upon stacks of large wooden crates. Except for a handful of boxes and rusty building materials, the room was largely empty. We took little comfort in the fact that there were fewer hiding places for an enemy soldier or rabid beast. The room was dim, just as it had been in the past, and the darkness lurking outside what little light we had hung heavy around us. Anything could be prowling behind that curtain of blackness. Being back in this room made my heart ache. I tried hard not to look at the spot where Alvin had died, the spot where Seth had killed him. One thing hadn't changed, however. The door that undoubtedly protected so many menacing secrets still remained. Like a steel monolith, it loomed in the darkness and greedily guarded its treasure. Above it, the glass eye still kept watch like an immortal sentinel.
What we're looking for has to be behind that door,
I said in a hushed tone. John squinted through the darkness at the door's security system, an eye scanner.
This might pose a bit more of a problem than the other door,
Sighed John.
I don't suppose anyone thought to scoop out an eye from that first beast, did they?
Seth, Diane, and I glanced at each other.
It wasn't a real question.
John groaned. A buzzing sound that devolved into a static hiss cut through the silence of the warehouse.
Why are you here?
Questioned a metallic voice. We shot glances at each other. The glass eye of the camera glared down at us. From behind that camera, someone was watching us. How long had they been watching? Since we entered the base? Since we parachuted in? Diane was the first to speak.
Why don't you come on out and we can have a nice chat?
She suggested.
Why are you here?
The voice behind the camera repeated.
I think you probably know the answer to that already.
John cut in. There was a long silence.
Then you will all die,
said the robotic voice.
I've had just about enough of this conversation.
Diane sighed. She knelt and removed her rocket-propelled grenade from her back. She threw it onto her shoulder and took aim at the door.
Everyone stand back.
She exclaimed. I wasn't sure if she was serious or if it was a threat, but when I saw John and Seth unquestioningly break into a sprint in the opposite direction to get out of the way, I knew it was best to do the same. Diane fired the RPG at the steel door. It whizzed through the air like an angry bumblebee before striking the door with a deafening boom. The room shook and I fell backward. Smoke hung heavy in the air around the door.
Are you crazy?
I shouted at Diane. She held up a finger demanding silence. The smoke around the door began to clear. The walls around the door were stained black from the blast. The place where the camera was mounted was empty, and the charred remains of the watchful glass eye lay destroyed at the foot of the steel door. The door, on the other hand, barely had a scratch on it.
Dang it.
Diane stomped her foot on the ground.
I was sure that would work.
She complained. A screech echoed through the empty warehouse. From a dark corner, another monstrosity stepped into the dim light. It was a hulking beast, and was at least twice the size of the first one we had faced. It had the body of a gorilla, but its unnaturally large head resembled an eagle. Its body was covered in a mixture of dark fur and white feathers. It had a thick, cat-like tail protruding from its backside, tipped by a gleaming stinger. I squinted. It was much too long to be a stinger. It was more like a metal blade. Worst of all, the creature had eyes randomly dotting its body, like some people had freckles. The beast reared on its hind legs and let out another shrill roar. Seth lazily waved his hand.
I got it.
He sighed.
It sure would be nice to have a rocket launcher right about now.
He mumbled, shooting an annoyed look at Diane. Diane half-heartedly pumped her fist.
We believe in you.
I'll provide supporting fire.
John assured, cocking his rifle. I honestly hadn't done much at this point to help fight. I raised my hand.
Me too,
I said confidently. Seth smirked.
Don't hit me by mistake.
If I do hit you, it won't be a mistake. I don't miss.
I shot back. Seth held my gaze for a few moments before finally turning away. He removed his jacket and let it fall to the floor. He gripped the mysterious weapon covered by the cloth and held it out in front of him. In one swift motion, he flung the cloth hiding the weapon to the floor, revealing a long sword in a plain sheath. Seth slowly unsheathed the blade and gently placed the sword's covering on the ground. He tested the weight of the blade with a few swipes at the air. The sword's cutting edge was nearly 4 feet in length, so, while it was fairly large, it wouldn't be unwieldy for someone of Seth's size. It lacked any sort of ornamentation to set it apart from any other piece of forged metal. It was strange. Why would something so nondescript be locked up in a high-security safe in the armory? The beast beat its chest like an enraged ape and charged in our direction. Seth took off to meet the creature. John and I prepared to offer supporting fire while Diane stood by. Her submachine gun wouldn't be accurate enough to be of any help at our current range, but she stayed tense and at the ready just in case she was needed. Just as Seth and the monster met in the middle, he stepped quickly to the side and threw a vicious slash at the creature's shoulder. However, it dipped its body to the side and the blade passed harmlessly by. At that moment, the creature's bladed tail made a stab at Seth's torso. Seth was able to bring up his sword in time to block the attack, but the beast used this opportunity to draw back and deliver a powerful punch into Seth's body. The force of the blow knocked Seth off of his feet and sent him rolling away.
Let's help him out,
Bellowed John, bringing his rifle up to his shoulder. I switched my weapon, the Viper, to its single-shot mode and let several shots fly toward the beast. John did the same with his old-fashioned gun. The gorilla-like creature let out another screech and flung its hands in the air like it was trying to fight off an angry swarm of flies. Unfortunately, our bullets seemed to have the same meager effect as an army of flies. We didn't appear to be doing much damage to the formidable monster. Our barrage did give Seth the time he needed to recover, however. He was back on his feet and making his way back toward the monster. This time he stopped and readied his sword. He was going to let the beast make the first move. The creature also didn't attack in haste. It slowly lumbered towards Seth, all the while its bladed tail twitched and moved from side to side. Despite looking like an animal, it was clear that the creature possessed wicked cunning. When it was within range, it began to repeatedly shoot its tail forward at Seth. Seth was able to parry, block, or dodge each strike, but the beast's tail had a longer range than Seth's sword, and the assault was relentless. Seth took a step back and began to give ground. John and I continued to fire at the creature, taking care not to accidentally hit Seth. The creature's flesh shivered as each bullet struck, but we were largely being ignored. I stopped firing for a moment. If this creature killed Seth, then the one who killed my squad would be no more. I could let this monster hand me my revenge. But if it killed Seth, could we fight it off ourselves?
This isn't helping,
I stated.
What do you suggest?
John replied, without removing his aim from the creature. I didn't answer. I took off running toward the beast. I had to get closer.
Do you have a death wish?
Shouted Diane.
Come back.
I ignored her. I didn't intend to get within spitting distance. I just had to get closer than I was at the moment. I closed half the distance and took aim. Seth was still busy blocking the beast's attacks. Its mouth was half open and its eyes were gleaming. I could have sworn that its beaked face was smiling. The creature's skin didn't seem to be affected by bullets, but what about those eyes it was dotted with? I took careful aim and fired a single shot. The bullet whistled through the air and found its mark. A loud squish rang out as soon as the lead shot pierced one of the eyes nestled in the beast's shoulders. The monster reared back and screamed. It stopped attacking Seth with its tail, and a hand flew up to grip the shoulder where the bullet had found its target. Blood flowed from between the creature's fingers. It fixed its sights on me and began to charge. Forgetting Seth, and in its anger, it started galloping toward me. I knew that normal bullets would have no effect, so I quickly switched ammunition to the explosive munition. I was able to fire off one explosive dart before the beast got too close to me. The miniature spear planted itself into the left arm of the beast. It didn't take long for it to explode. The left arm of the monster erupted in fire and viscera.
Whoa!
I mouthed in amazement. Despite the wound, the gorilla-like monster was able to sustain its charge in my direction. I switched back to assault rifle mode and sprayed bullets at the creature. The slugs sank into its flesh but didn't do anything to slow the charge. Seth, like a blur, leaped into the air from behind the creature and swung his sword. The blade made a wet thwack as it bit into the neck of the monster. Its spine cracked as the sword fought to cut through the bone. The sword whistled through the air as it broke free on the other side of the beast's throat. The head fell to the ground with a heavy thud, and a pool of black blood began to form where the head had fallen. The headless body took a few more weak steps before finally sagging to the ground. Blood oozed from the wounds on the creature's shoulder and neck, and the creature finally went still. I knew Seth was strong, but that plain-looking sword of his must be extremely well made to cut like that. Off to the side, Seth cleaned and sheathed the blade. Diane came jogging up behind me with John following close behind.
That was stupid.
She chided.
It worked, didn't it?
I retorted.
You broke from the plan.
John said sternly. I scowled at them. Good soldiers don't go against orders, but I wasn't a soldier anymore. Before I could open my mouth, Seth spoke up.
She did okay.
He admitted. He clapped me hard on the back, making me stumble forward a few steps. A small smile crept across my face. I wouldn't say no to some praise, even if it was from Seth.
Rosid is at least qualified to be a distraction.
He finished, nodding in a self-satisfied manner. My smile morphed into an annoyed frown. I should have let it kill or at least maim him.
I suppose there isn't a wrong way to kill one of these,
sighed Diane. The four of us huddled around the fallen beast.
It is dead, isn't it?
Diane hesitated, craning her neck to get a better look at the fallen beast.
If losing a head doesn't take one of these down, We have bigger problems.
John reckoned.
Speaking of problems,
John rubbed his temples with his fingers.
we still have to find a way through that door. Judging by this fellow, they obviously don't want us poking around back there.
Let's have a look around.
Diane pointed to the wall around the door.
These kinds of places always have a secret switch, a sconce to twist, or a book to pull on to open a door.
She said with an annoyed tone.
Always?
I snickered.
You'd be surprised.
She replied.
The people who design these kinds of places fit a certain personality profile, you could say. They have similar tastes.
The three of them dispersed to look around the empty warehouse. I stayed where I was. I couldn't look away from the dead creature. It was just as grotesque in death as it was in life. I knelt down next to it and poked it roughly with one of my fingers. Its body was hard from a combination of rigor mortis setting in and of being made up of solid muscle. I crept over to examine the severed head. Though it had been tinkered with in the lab, it was definitely from an animal. I stood and tapped the toe of my boot on the ground, thinking. I had an idea that was worth a shot, but secretly I hoped it wouldn't work. I went back over to the body to get a closer look at the eyes that dotted the creature. The lids were closed, but I wrenched one open. These eyes didn't look like they belonged to an animal. They looked human. I removed my knife from my belt and took a deep breath. Here goes nothing, I thought. Holding the eyelid open, I plunged my knife into the eye socket and began to dig and cut. With a bit of work, the eye came loose. I gave it a tug, and the slimy orb popped out into the palm of my hand. Careful not to look at it, I quickly made my way to the door, blocking our progress. Diane was fruitlessly pawing around the wall near the door.
Find something?
Diane asked.
Trying something.
I answered hurriedly. I wanted to get what I was about to do over with as fast as possible. I held the eye between my fingers and pressed it up against the retina scanner and held my breath. Diane held her nose.
That's a bit gross.
I ignored her. Hearing Diane, John, and Seth stopped what they were doing and approached me from behind, curious to see what I was attempting. The scanner made a whirring noise and shot out several pulses of light into the eye. The whirring stopped.
Credentials recognized. Welcome back, Dr. Gildo,
said a polite, computerized voice. The steel door blocking our path came to life and slid to the side. The way forward was open.